Broadcasting live from the Phoenix Business RadioX studio in Tempe, Arizona. You are tuning in to Culture Crush with Kendra Maples. This podcast will dive into a variety of companies that are crushing it with a great company culture.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Culture Crush. On this podcast, we focus on everything surrounding businesses with good company culture. We talk with company leaders to learn about real-life experiences, tips, and the best practices for creating a healthy work environment. We will also share resources that are helping to support growing a good company culture. On this podcast, we continue to highlight amazing companies that are crushing it with a great company culture, and today is no different. Today we have Neil Shah, team lead with technical recruiting for Carvana. Team spirit is very evident at Carvana, and every day they let their passions and creativity foster innovation. They take big swings, set ambitious goals, and challenge one another to make data and process-driven decisions in everything they do. They've been changing the game since about 2013, and they're not taking their foot off the gas yet. No pun intended. No, it's a pun intended, right?
It's definitely intended.
It's definitely intended. So, Neil, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
You are so welcome. I'm so excited to have you on the show. You and I actually connected, oh my gosh, like 2.5 years ago, maybe. And
That's about right,
yeah, and we've been in touch back and forth. And I've always brought up this conversation of company culture with you and with Carvana. And, you know, it started with hearing a little bit about it from you. So now full circle, we get to have you on the show. So I'm really excited to have this conversation.
Same. I always love talking culture. I think it's something that we talk about a lot here internally, but also like as a recruiter, just candidates always ask about that because they care about where they work more and more now than it used to be in the past. And I think that's a very, very good thing. Is driving companies to do some really awesome stuff.
Yeah. And you mentioned a good point there about it's more common now. I was just talking with some folks yesterday about this. I kind of love that millennials are the ones who have kind of pushed that envelope a little bit, right? They start a job and there's none of this, oh, you have to stay with that job for 5-10 years, or you have to stay with it. You, even if you're grumpy, even if it sucks, you know, that's how you're going to put food on the table. But the reality is, if you're not happy, then go somewhere else. You should be with a company that fully supports you. So I love that you mentioned that right off the bat. But before we get into all of this, I want to hear a little bit about you first and your background, what you do with Carvana, and kind of what brought you to Carvana. Tell us a little bit about who Neil is.
For sure. I'm terrible talking about myself, so I'm going to try my best. So I am the team lead of technical recruiting at Carvana. I've been with Carvana for 3 years now, which is insane and somehow makes me like an OG there because we've grown so fast and we're still such a young company. But a little bit about my background. I've been in Phoenix all my life. I went to ASU for my undergrad. And then when I graduated in 2009, I'd already started recruiting while still in ASU. So I've been recruiting it'll be 14 years this summer. Oh God, how old does that make me?
No one will do the math. It's okay.
No one needs to do that. So yeah, I've been recruiting for 14 years. Before coming to Carvana, I spent 10 and a half, 11 years in agency recruiting with a few different agencies across the board, a couple consulting companies that had recruiting arm to it, and a couple of just straight agencies that where I spent most of my time. After doing it for a long time, I realized that even in the best agencies, and I think I did work with some of the best agencies that had an amazing culture, there wasn't a next step for me anymore, right? Like I kind of learned what I could. To be a leader in an agency ends up being kind of like doing two jobs because your money really comes from placements and placing people in jobs, and you don't necessarily get as well compensated for the leadership side. So like to still be able to pay your bills and everything, you have to do things a little bit differently. You end up doing a lot more work. And there wasn't the same reward, right? The monetary reward wasn't enough for me. The way it was in my early 20s, getting out of college and just wanting to buy this and that and do all these crazy things. And you get a little older and you start to realize that there's other things other than the monetary that do matter, right? Mm-hmm. And so that's actually where I went to Carvana. They've been a client of mine for a few years. My boss at my last agency had moved over to Carvana. And then I got to a point where I said, what's next for me? And the answer just didn't lie in the world I already lived in. And so I started to explore an area that I thought I wouldn't go into because I thought it was just a little bit too different. It was going to be, some of the agency recruiters I met through my career were very like, it kind of followed a little bit of a slow pace. And just kind of like, yeah, you just kind of go and clock in and do your thing. And that's kind of it. And that kind of boring to me, to be honest. Like it didn't seem like there's a challenge there. It seemed like more of the same. And like, sure, maybe I can grow into a lead to let other people do the same thing. And like, that's fine. But I wasn't enthused by what I'd heard. And then I talked to somebody I trusted because I already worked with them for several years and knew them through some other contacts even before that. Which is my boss, Kiara Hughes, here at Carvana. And, she was telling me more about what Carvana does, with recruiting, like the pace that they work at and stuff. And that really got me intrigued to say like, okay, this might be a thing to try out. So I went and interviewed with her about a year after she left. I contacted her and said, hey, maybe it's about time for me to look at opportunities. And she had just happened to lose her main tech recruiter. So the timing was like kind of perfect when we were kind of chatting with each other. And I said, all right, let's take a look. And so I interviewed and ended up taking the opportunity with them. And it's been insane ever since. So what my team does, so I came in as a senior recruiter. I got promoted to team lead about it kind of late 2019. And then it's team lead for a year and a half with an asterisk, right? I think we had the asterisk here that is 2020. And so effectively like 6 months of leadership at this point. But no, I came in and kind of took over a lot of the technical recruiting, and just it's one of those things where you get rewarded at a company that's this fast paced for doing things well in both the culture and like the monetary aspect, but also like you get more responsibility and more work that way. And there's a balance, I think, that we try to reach, where it's not just like, oh, you've always done this, but now also here's 10 more things, because there's only so many hours in a day.
Yes.
But like, trying to balance that and like let me build a team and say, okay, some of the things that I've been recruiting on, others are going to recruit on. So my team now is responsible for all technical recruiting in Phoenix for like our headquarters locations across analytics, data science, information technology, engineering, and product. You think I'd be able to rattle that off a lot faster. So, but yeah, that's a bit about me.
And so with you making that jump after your previous employer made that jump, that kind of scenario in itself actually says a lot about Carvana, right? Because they're people. So you and all the others on your team, that's kind of a marketing team, right? When you're talking to other people, you're telling people about the company culture, the benefits, the growth opportunities, all of that. Internal employees are a beneficial marketing, situation for companies. So it's beneficial for companies to grow a good company culture because in the end, it's going to save dollars in the long run, right? You're saving on marketing, you're saving on recruiting, you're saving on retention when all of that is connected and you've got these current staff telling others and bringing others on board. So your previous employer was able to kind of fill you in, but I'm curious if you happen to know why she took that jump. What did she learn? Like, what did she know? Did she have anyone kind of giving her that insight, or did she just jump in and go with it?
It's a really good question. So it's funny because like she just wrote a blog article about this like a month ago. About like her journey to Carvana and everything. And one of the things that she and I talked about when she made the leap, as well as one of the things that she mentions in the blog article is like, we knew a lot about Carvana. She knew a lot of the folks over here because like she was the main account manager for the company. So she got to build a lot of relationships and get to know a lot of people very, very well. So there was a little bit less unknown coming here versus a company that she hadn't been doing business with for the last couple of years. But moreover, she wasn't looking for a job. So there was a little bit of a wooing that Carvana was doing as well, because like they saw somebody that they said, okay, this is somebody that would add value to our company in what they can do in recruiting and how they can build our culture in a lot of different facets. And so one of the lines, which is a line that I believe he stole, but I can't remember where he stole it from. It's something that is actually well known, is our chief product officer, Dan Gill. He had kind of an off the cuff conversation with her, and it kind of boiled down to the quote that he shared, which is something along the lines, and I may butcher it a little bit, but if somebody hands you a ticket to a rocket ship, you don't say when it's taking off, you just get on board, right? And that's really what Carvana still is, but especially was at that time, right? Is it was still small, it was still very scrappy. It hadn't really proven that it was going to succeed yet, but it had enough behind it to say, there's a really good chance of us succeeding, right? We're not some early Series A or pre-funding startup that like may or may not be able to pay the bill tomorrow. Like we have enough in the bank to say that we have a track record to pull from and like enough to pay our people. There is a high likeliness that this can succeed. There's still a risk that it won't, but like, do you want to be the one who said, you know, I didn't make it on the rocket? Or a friend of mine, his dad comes to mind because he says that like, you know, he had tickets to Woodstock back in the 60s, original Woodstock, right? And he didn't go because he had something else going on, because no one knew how big Woodstock was going to be. And it's like, well, looking back, he's like, well, shoot, I wish I would have went to Woodstock, right? It's kind of similar to that of like, there's this thing where like you take the risk. If it pays off, awesome. If it doesn't, it's not like you are going to go bankrupt or something. Like you just go find another job. Right. And that's the world we live in right now, is like, there's always something else available for people who are talented and you know, willing to put the work.
And it's competitive now. You know, you've got companies that are growing, and not only growing, but growing fast, and that they're growing with unique cultures. It's more of a thing, right? You mentioned that in the beginning. It's more of a thing that people are looking for companies with a good culture. It's not just, hey, I need to find a job that's going to pay me X amount of dollars. Well, is that X amount of dollars really going to be beneficial to you if you're miserable at your job? So now there's more of a reason and more of a passion behind growing a good company culture, so that all of that kind of fits together. So you mentioned, you know, getting involved kind of in those early stages of, hey, let's take the risk, let's take the ticket on the rocket ship. Now, fast forward to now, what an amazing company, right? You and I have just talked about this recently, about the platform that is Carvana, right? And now through this past year of a pandemic, where we've got other companies that have had to shift to remote and shift to contactless. And here you guys are like, hey, we've been doing this. We just give you a big coin and your car comes to you from a vending machine, and there's no, you know, cheesy salesman. Tell me about this past year. How has that been? And, you know, the growth that you still are having with Carvana.
Yeah. Past year's been very, very interesting. A lot's happened to all of us personally. But like, if I think of it from the lens of the company Carvana, there's a certain amount of like silver lining in that all of our competitors are right now trying to figure it out, right? And they're trying to figure out, how do you do this, that, and the other thing, and how do you deliver and contact us and figure out the paperwork and not have a sales cycle, because those businesses, like the dealership business, has been built on having a sales cycle of you know, you have X person here, that you have your salesperson, you have your sales manager, your finance manager, and things like that. And I think that like, if I'm being truthful, there are probably, you know, a number of players out there in the industry that's still a good experience. But I think that like the reason that Carvana has been able to be successful even before all of this is a lot of those places don't give a good experience anymore. They really, it's really about like, how much can you possibly get out of somebody, right? And that's where we came about, is like, you know, how do we get rid of that process? And so last year really proved the model even more, because there were certain points where I think we were probably the only person you could buy from in certain markets. And our goal, you know, going into that was basically, you know, we hit March and the world exploded, or imploded, I guess, really, right? And we all went inside. And so the very first thing that we worried about was, what about our people? And I think that's the most impactful thing, you know, for me, is we had to make some hard choices. We were lucky enough not to lay off. We had to make some other hard choices as far as like number of hours and things like that. And one thing that our CEO actually doesn't like to to talk about is, we came together with what we call the We're All in This Together Fund. We have 7 core values. One of them is We're All in This Together. And so, a number of people, our executive suite and board included, didn't take paychecks for a while, and took that money and put it back to the people affected by any kind of hour reduction, things like that.
Wow.
And so, when you see something like that, that was the very first thing, is like, how do we get all these people out of the office? Our IT people and my department as well, I was part of this to a very minor extent. There's a lot of other people that were doing much, much more than I was. I was just trying to help liaison a little bit, take some of the weight off of other people's shoulders of like, how are we getting all these folks out of the office, right? We don't know how long it's for, but how are we getting them out of here? And there's technical issues, and there's equipment issues, and all these different things. We got everyone that we possibly could, anyone that could do their job from anywhere else, even though historically we never thought of that as being a possibility, was out of the office within 3 weeks. And that's including at the time, probably 1,800 person call center, plus all of our back office employees, any of our market operations, like it just across the company, we moved thousands of people without having a pre-existing game plan, because we hadn't had to do it before, to go remote. So,
and you said within how long? What was that time frame?
3 weeks.
Sheesh.
And like that included getting equipment for all of them, because a lot of us work off of laptops, but like for our call center and stuff, you don't need a laptop necessarily, because you have to be at the phone and everything. So we had to figure out, okay, we can't send the phones home to everybody, because not everyone has like Ethernet off of their house and stuff, right? Yep. So like, how do we get soft phones going? How do we get a meaningful experience for them? How do we get a setup that has the monitors and the keyboard and everything, so that they can put everything on display the way they're used to, so they can still take care of our customers, right? And then we tried to figure out what happens to the business, right? And like what we found is like the business took a big hit at first, just like everybody did, because the first like month of COVID, everyone hunkered down, no one did anything. Right. I think the only businesses making any money at that point were probably, grocery stores, something like that, where you're trying to get all your provisions to last for in your bunker kind of mentality. And so from there, like once the smoke cleared a little bit, or the dust settled a little bit from the initial shock, it was a big boon actually to us. Like we grew tremendously, and really started to get a lot of folks coming in saying like, we don't have another outlet to be able to purchase a vehicle. And then what was even more important is like the internal communication around that was, we're going to get this big boon because we have a lot of people that are getting stimulus checks. We have a lot of people who still need to buy vehicles in markets that can't buy them. We have all of this kind of perfect storm of people willing to spend on a vehicle. Now we got to convert that to not just bought a car from us, but they loved us. Right. And so that culture has to exude outward for us through our customer service. And one of the things, one of the only metrics that has been consistently talked about in our like regular all hands meetings by our CEO is our NPS score. And like every time that thing dips even like one little point, he's like, what are we doing to make this better? Why isn't this right? And around that conversation is also, why do our people not feel enabled to give the right experience? Right. And what do we need to do to take care of them so they can take care of others? Right. And it's just like any profession, right? If you think of a doctor doesn't get to take care of you if they're sick themselves, right? They have to heal themselves and then they can take care of you. It's same for us. If our people aren't happy and enjoying what they do, they're not going to give a good experience to our customers. So how do we correct that? If it needs to be corrected, and if it doesn't, then how do we make sure that they have the tools to enable them to exude that to the outside world? And that was the big focus for us. And it was a huge, huge win for us in 2020 is like, yes, the sales numbers and everything went up, but our service level also stayed up, and allowed us to not only win the immediate customers right there, but also prove to them that they should tell their friends and family, like, hey, had a really cool experience with Carvana. They didn't even make me sign any paperwork. I did it all online, right? Because we wanted to go completely contactless, and like all those little things and stuff that we figured out a long time ago, and a lot of our competitors are now trying to figure that out.
And so you mentioned, making sure that the employees are supported. I mean, the fact that you were talking about your leadership, some of them not even taking paid because you're supporting the people first, right? And then focus, how do we get the people situated? How do we get them content, happy with their same setup? And then we focus on the business side, right? And sales and all of that. So you guys already had crazy growth, that in itself is a topic of conversation to have with companies about how do you keep that culture growing as you're growing the company? But then you're talking about, the shift to being at home and still needing to make sure employees are supported and feel, they're enjoying their work and whatnot. So what are some of maybe the steps that you guys took? What are some of the tools? Is there any insight that you can share about what that looks like right now with growing that company culture through all of this with people being at home, right? They've got more distractions than ever. I mean, when I'm working from home, my dogs are the worst coworkers in the world. What does that look like? Can you give us any insight on like any tools or any actions or things that are happening to try and support that culture now that it's kind of shifted completely?
Yeah, yeah. Well, first, before I get into that, I do have to say, like, if anyone hasn't seen the memes of like, tell us what your pet is doing right now, but say it's your coworker.
Yeah.
You know, my coworker is napping on the floor next to my desk right now. Right? Like,
Nice.
those went a long way for a little bit.
Nice. If I wasn't in the studio right now, you would probably hear one of my coworkers whining in the background. So
Yeah. I think the first thing, going back to like going remote and all of that, the first thing that we did was just like make sure we made a plan around safety, right? Because this whole thing hit, I think none of us really expected it, right? We all started seeing in the news probably January, February, something like that. There was some like little mention in the corner, right? And you started hearing about it. But we've all been through this before, and like, we've seen different things come through the news that kind of pass. And I think, at least for myself, like I expected this one to just pass. I didn't realize how serious it was going to be. And then we started going home. I was like, oh, this is getting like really, really serious. Okay, now like, let's take a little more, take another step further. And I think that the first thing that we did was our executive leadership and like our senior leaders all got together and made a plan for two things. And both of them had to do with how do we take care of our people. And so first was, what are the policies that we're going to put in place to say, like, should someone get COVID, what are we doing? Like, how are we working with them? Because like we do have attendance policies and things like that in our organization, right? But like, do those matter anymore, right? Like, if somebody gets sick from something like coronavirus, like, does it matter? And the answer is like, kind of no. Like, we want it to be within reason and things like that. We also we want to make sure that like our people know that just because you got sick and you went beyond your normal PTO or anything like that does not mean you're losing your job. First of all. Secondly, you're not using your own personal time or your time off for this. We're going to give you special time that we're going to create in response to this, right? That alleviates a lot of stress and the concern and lets them know, I think, at least it let me know that like the company has my back. Like if I turn around tomorrow and get COVID, I don't have to worry about my job, right? No matter what level I am in the organization. So I think there was that side. The other side of what they did is you have to preserve the business, because there's nothing to come back to. Then you kind of we kill everybody anyways, right? And so creating things like that weight fund and putting those things in place to say, like, your job is safe. We're going to make sure that, like, one of the things that we did is anybody affected by an hour reduction had medical insurance the entire time. Like, there was no lapse in medical insurance, because that way if you do get sick, even if we give you the time, it doesn't really matter if you don't have insurance. You're like, those bills pile up really, really fast. We all know it. And so, how are we taking care of our people? So I think that was step one. After that, I think that there was a bit of a haze of like trying to figure things out, that all companies went through, and we were all trying to figure out, okay, how do we create this culture? And I think that it started a lot actually at the team basis of like, your people the best. Right. So like my boss knows me and her other director and direct reports the best. So what is she doing to try to build that? And then with that, we started to build more of a playbook for the company, like how we want to actually communicate and everything, and how we want to understand these things. So, we have regular check-ins from leaderships to different groups. So, for our chief product officer, he does a regular AMA with anybody that directly or indirectly reports to him. And, there was, I think, like the second one that he did while we were still putting this playbook together and trying to figure it out. One of our engineers had their, probably less than a year kid in their hand. And he put himself on mute, and and all of us were just like, "Oh, she's so cute!" Right? Like you have that like, little
Yeah.
moment of everyone wanting to see the newborn.
Yeah.
But that also sparked us to say like, let's change how we do things a little bit, and change not just how we're going to do the fun of this, right? Because we all tried the Zoom happy hours, and those were fun for a minute, and then those got old really, really fast.
Yep.
And so we came up with other ideas of doing Jackbox games, and right now our team has been trying to figure out if we can logistically do a virtual cooking night, where you get like some ingredients and like make a dinner or something. You're trying to figure out like some different team building things that way, since
Yeah.
we can't get together and go somewhere. But like moreover, I think that where we've really excelled is putting guardrails in place to make sure that there is a balance. Because I don't leave my work home anymore, right? Like I'm always here, and my desk is always here.
Yeah.
I'm always ready to go.
Yeah.
And so at a certain point, I have to shut something off, right? And it really can't be my family, right? Like that's going to create a bigger problem for me personally, and even for Carvana if I'm going through turmoil there. And so we started to put things in place to make sure that people understood like the expectation was as far as work hours and stuff, especially for employees that maybe weren't tracking hours, because they're not an employee. But also try to say things along the lines of how can we work together but apart, and do things more asynchronously, right? So can this meeting be an email thread that goes back and forth for a day? Or does it have to be a meeting where we really want to bounce the ideas off each other? Because if it just go back and forth for a day, well, you're going to schedule this day out anyways, or you can send the email now, and by the time you had it scheduled, you can have the answer, right? Or at least close enough to the answer that you can then just huddle up with maybe one person instead of 7, and be able to respect the fact that like someone does have their newborn sitting next to them in a crib, because that's the only way they can make it work right now. And we all do have other weird factors that weren't a thing before, because our kids can't go to school or daycare, our pets can't go to pet care and things like that, that we're dealing with. And so I think like just alleviating that stress and making it like removing the stigma of the fact that you have to take care of things that aren't work during what would typically be work hours, right? That's a big deal. And I think a big game changer for a lot of us to be able to say like, okay, I can take a minute right now and go help my kid with whatever Zoom issue they're having on school right now, or be able to make sure they have some activities because it's summer break. And right, we've been through the gamut at this point, right? We've been doing it for a year. There's nothing we haven't been through as far as the time of year. So hopefully that wasn't too long-winded a way of saying that. Like I think that we adapted well. And I think that we're also realistic, and we know that there's always something to learn, and we're always trying to listen to things like Culture Crush and anything else that we can, see what other ideas we can pull. And I've been in a number of webinars that I've attended and stuff to see if there's anything that I can do for not just my direct team, but for the culture of Carvana to help maintain that.
Yeah. And you mentioned how it's we're learning this, right? Everyone, I don't know how many times I've heard people say now, there's no playbook. Okay, I've heard 10,000 people say that by now, but the reality is it's true, right? We're learning, and you guys are learning over time that, hey, maybe we don't have to do all the Zoom meetings. In the very beginning, Zoom was cool. Let's do all the Zoom meetings. Let's do the Zoom happy hours. And now, like you said, at this point, I'm like, cool, I've been staring at a computer for 10 hours. Like, I'm tired of it. One of the things that I've been trying to do with some volunteers I am on the leadership team for Conscious Capitalism Arizona, and with some of my volunteer calls that I have to do, just normal check-ins that I do with them, I've tried to kind of put it towards the end of the day and say, hey, let's do a walk. You call, I'll call, whatever we need to do, but get out of your house, go walk the neighborhood, and let's touch base, right?
I like that.
Just to change it up. And so that's, one of the things that you guys you're realizing and you're learning throughout the process. Hey, we need to change it up a little bit. I'm curious too. I want to know a little bit about, because you're talking about some of the things that you've been doing and learning and changing, and you've mentioned the different teams. So I'm assuming there's a variety of different teams, right? You've got your recruiting team, and I don't know how many other teams it's probably split up, right? So you said sometimes there's all calls with, the upper leadership and down. But I'm curious as far as the culture. How do you keep that strong across all of the teams? And I'll explain what this question is meaning. I've worked for a handful of different companies that are bigger companies, smaller companies, companies that I've partnered with. And I've seen that sometimes the company as a whole has a great company culture. But then when you look at the team level, it can be completely different. You can have one team that's striving, and then you have another team that doesn't have that strong company culture. So, how does it look as far as teams, as far as making sure that it's not just your team that's successful, but all of the other teams too, kind of helping each other? Like, can you give any insight into kind of how that is?
Yeah, I think one part of it is going to be share the ideas, right? So like I talked to some of the team leads within the people operations department, but we also talk to the leaders we work with on the hiring side and try to share ideas there. And so like if one of us has a good idea, like share that out, see who else wants to do that, right? And so I think there's some of that. I think transparency goes a really, really long way of sharing as much as you possibly can about what's going on across the organization. I think we've done a number of different initiatives that do touch company-wide, right? Like we made a big push for something that was already kind of coming off the ground before all the COVID stuff hit, which is employee resource groups, basically. They're different groups. We have a Carvana Pride group for the LGBTQ plus community. We have a Beacon group for Black employees and allies. We have a veterans group for any veterans. It's a little more self-explanatory, obviously. Right. We have a number of different women in business, women technology groups. So just anything like that we can do to where they're also enabled to create events that are not team specific, like interest specific, and having that kind of thing. So like we did Carvana Pride drag bingo, right, which was like a lot of fun, and it was a virtual event, obviously, but it's still, it changed it up where it was something that was like significantly different enough that it wasn't just a virtual happy hour, because it wasn't just a few people sitting on a Zoom. It was like a group activity, something that like they wouldn't have been able to do otherwise, right? We had that. We've had educational events all through February for Black History Month. Through our Beacon group, and different things like that. I think that those are things that we've done for the company as a whole. We also, again, something that we've been working on, but like was very meaningful to release here during COVID, was started to release like different recognition programs. And it's like one that we released company wide was an anniversary program. And so for each even number anniversary that you hit, you get like a pin, and for each odd number anniversary you hit, you actually get like a pretty nice gift. So like I got my 1 year anniversary gift. It was a pair of Allbirds, which are like nice shoes, and probably something I like wouldn't have bought for myself.
Nice.
They also made these little acrylic towers that look like the vending machine. And for every odd year that you're at, you get like another thing. And for every milestone that you were at, you get like this little like sliver that goes in between the different levels. It's actually really cute to be able to share with our team. And so like things like that to try to keep us connected. And I think that also like in our leadership meetings, there is there's a directive basically to say like, we don't know each of their teams well enough to say like this one activity is good for everybody, right? Like, and I don't think that even if we're in the office, that necessarily exists completely. I think there's some things that you can do in an office setting that you can't do now. Like we've done like popcorn carts, or we've actually had puppy adoption companies come out and like bring just puppies to play with that we do outside the building and stuff.
I would adopt
things
them
like
all.
that. Right. And so things like that we maybe can't do, but is there a way that we can encourage our leaders to put forth the effort, and if that requires spending a little bit, like go spend a little bit and do something to encourage your team to completely turn off the work part of their brain and just go do something fun for a little bit, even if it has to be virtual, whatever it is. And so like, a good example of that is every year we do a hackathon for our engineers. So they all get to shut off work, barring any like actual major production issues, right? Like keep the business running kind of thing. But for like 3 days, they get to shut it all off and go work on whatever passion project they want to. One of the fun ones this last October was one of our engineers did a bunch of Carvana themed pop culture Zoom backgrounds. So you had like a Mandalorian, a Scooby-Doo, and like he somehow worked Carvana in there. There's a Game of Thrones one, right? Like all that kind of stuff.
Nice.
And so with that, they also did a bunch of other side events with it where like every day at 3, they do a Jackbox event, which I don't know if you've seen Jackbox, but it's an online gaming platform. It's actually a lot of fun. They have, you buy packs of games, and they're all party games that you can do with the computer.
Okay.
So some of them are like murder mystery. One of the ones that we did, oh God, what did we do? We did kind of like one of those word scrambler things, but there's a competition there too. And so it's healthy competition with your coworkers where no one's going to get like upset and trying to flip a table. But like someone gets a little bit of bragging rights for like half a minute, right?
Yeah.
So you move on to the next round.
Yeah.
And so, and I think some teams even did like some like small prizes and stuff like that. So just doing things like that, try to keep it interesting, I think is where the leadership came in and said like, try to enable everybody to allow them to do that. Cause I think it's one of those things where you're trying to sit here thinking of, especially last year when we were like, okay, what's going to happen? Like, especially going to summer and stuff where everyone was a little bit like, the sky is falling.
Yeah.
Excuse me. Cause it really did feel like that. Reminding people that like, hey, sky's not falling. Things are weird right now.
Yeah.
And we got to get through this, but like, let's take care of the people that got us here. Because they're the ones that we're going to need to get us out of here too. And so I think that just having that communication from the top down and communicating the updates on the company on a regular basis is really helpful.
And just needing to be so creative because you're missing that piece of that in-person interaction, right? Like you were talking about a lot of the things that were taking place in person. You can't do that anymore. So you have to be creative and develop new ideas. And tell me about, because I think we've talked about this before, even the setup when you're in person at Carvana is very like relaxed and fun and unique, right? And so now everyone's at their own house and needing to kind of have that feel. What does it look like as far as a timeline? Do you guys even have a timeline of when you're going to go back one day? Or, I mean, I don't think anyone really has a timeline with any of this, but what does that side look like?
The goal is to get back in the office, right, and build and kind of get back to the culture that we had, and with the culture, the events and stuff that happened with that. I think that the culture hasn't been lost necessarily, but the events and some of that interaction that we can't do has been lost a little bit in some ways, and that's just the like physical inability to do it because we're all working from 10,000 different homes, right?
Yeah.
And so getting that back is definitely on the list. I wouldn't say we have a specific timeline. I think that like the goal is to make sure that we, the flip side of it is like, there was a concern, I think, for myself and for others at certain points, earlier on, where it's like, am I just gonna have to go back one day, or like, what's gonna happen? Like, my kid doesn't have childcare right now.
Yeah.
Like I've got a 9-year-old that just leave her here, right? Like,
yeah, and that's the case
hugely her responsible.
That's a case for a lot of people right now, right?
Yeah.
This debacle of, well, I can't go back to work in person because my kid's not going back to person in school.
Yeah. Yeah. And so I think that like some of that was also, it led us kind of late last year or getting into like Q3, Q4 last year to say, okay, we're going to start to create a little more structure around this and like guarantee a certain time period of notice that you'll have to be able to get things in order. Right. And then, work with your leadership as needed. And that way, like, and our goal has always been after things were like very, very settled. Right. So it's not like, well, numbers kind of came down a little bit. Arizona's opening. Let's go for it. Like we all saw that happen, 6 months ago when things kind of opened up and then they all had to shut back down and stuff. And so we're trying not to make it that roller coaster of like in and out, in and out.
Yep.
And so part of it is wait till CDC, WHO, we have doctors that we contract with and consult with, all are in agreement that like it is now safe. It is very unlikely for us to have to pull back out of the office again, right? And then put people back in the office. And then when you do, give them the notice needed, right? So I think we either wanted to give 2 or 3 months, but plenty of notice to say, if we're open, that means that schools and childcare are open as well, because CDC has opened up enough that those things would have been open as well. Let's say your specific childcare center has been closed down because of funding and COVID and whatever else. You have 2 months to figure it out, right? That's enough time for you to go research and call some places, do some interviews, whatever you need to do to go get that taken care of for your kids, right? So I think that's kind of the rough timeline, right? It's more of like how much notice we want to give than an actual date.
Yeah.
It's hard to say an actual date because the numbers keep doing the whole roller coaster up and down thing.
Oh, yeah.
That we've all kind of been like, opening in a tab somewhere in Chrome and just click on it every once in a while when we want to stress ourselves out.
But at least there is that goal of being in person, right? Because there's a lot of companies that now have realized, like you said in the very beginning, we never really thought it was a thing that we could adapt to having all of our staff, in remote places. And now there's a lot of companies that are like, oh, damn, we can do this and we can, save money from having this big building that we're paying for and, electrical and water and cleaning and all of that. We can have our employees be remote because then the other factor in that is, which you would probably see right from the recruiting side, is then it's opening up your window a little bit. Now they can hire people from all different areas. It doesn't have to be within the range of the office, right? They can hire from all over the place because folks are remote. But with you guys, you definitely want to be able to be in person. So as far as your role with recruiting, are you still recruiting with that goal of, okay, you're going to be remote right now, but then you need to be in person when this happens?
Yeah, I think that's a little bit of a mixed bag. And I think that the reality is
all of this is a mixed bag. Don't worry.
Yeah. I think the reality is like, it depends on the role in the team to some extent of like what we're doing there. I think that the goal is to get as many people back in the office as possible once it's safe to do so and do it in a responsible manner.
Yeah.
But I think that there are exceptions in certain areas. And so like we evaluate those on a case by case basis to some extent.
Yeah.
My honest opinion of like industry as a whole, or just like work offices in a whole is that a lot of the companies, my guess and like my prediction for whatever is that a lot of the companies that are going fully remote, there's going to be a number of them, especially the local ones and some of the big tech companies. There's going to be a turnaround at some point, right? Of like let's get more back in the office, and they're going to start to move people around the U.S. or realize that, oh, we hired a bunch of people in Phoenix, let's open an office there and things like that, because I think that there are gains and losses on both sides of remote work and in office work. And not just like productivity wise. I think that there can, and that it depends on the individual too, right? Like some people are more productive in the office, some people are more productive at home, but also from like a career growth objective of like being able to work closely enough with the person who's above you to see what they're doing, right? Those kinds of things. There's the cultural aspect. There's something to be said about that face to face, right? And so I think that like you can point to, I create, speaking in terms of economics, back in like, my ASU days, I create X number of widgets a day. If I do that from home, I'm able to create X plus 5. That's a very old school mentality of like, you work in a job, you create widgets, you die from that job one day or retire from it, right? Like depending on how lucky you are, I guess. And then then that's it, right? Whereas right now, like we talked about earlier, is you have a lot of options. And so what else brings you satisfaction? Is your satisfaction purely from building X and building this widget and building more of those in a day than you used to? Or is there something else with that? And I think that and like the ideation or like creating ideas at all like is different when I'm talking to somebody versus when I'm doing it on my own. Right. And so like Zoom has been a huge help to this. Like I don't know that we could function the same way that we do right now without the technology that we have and being able to, like, we couldn't do this interview right here, right? I'm sitting in my house, you're sitting in your studio. But even more so, like my boss and I can't bounce ideas off each other. The people that work for me, my peers, we don't get to do that without Zoom. I think there is an inherent difference to how that functions when you're sitting next to each other and talking to each other. And there's just an intangible quality of that that I'm not saying you can't replace, and I'm not saying that we haven't found ways or that other companies haven't found ways to make do, but I do think that like even if you're a remote employee, it's beneficial to have some cadence of coming into an office and working with the people around you and getting that interaction. And I think it builds a different layer of relationship. I would venture to guess that most of us are more likely with a new person, not somebody that we already know, but with a new person to build that relationship when we see them at the coffee machine, or at one of the activities in the office, or something like that, or walking to a meeting down the hall, than we are in the extra minute that we have at the end of a Zoom.
Yeah.
Right. And so there's just that piece that I think that a lot of companies are going to find is valuable. And there's likely to be a swing in a few years. But I think there's going to be a little bit of a COVID hangover that we'll have to get over.
I like that. Well, and like you said, it's a mixed bag, right? Because then you have to factor in that you have different personalities. You have some people that are totally content making those widgets at home, making 5 more widgets than they did before, not having the person next door come and interrupt them during the day. They're just focused on that task at home. Then you have people like me. I'm like, okay, can I go see people yet? Can I go to coffee meetings yet? Like, how can I get out of my house and not talk to my dogs all day? Like, you've got people like me that I'm fueled by the interactions that I have with other people. And yes, thankfully, I have Zoom, and like you said, we have the technology to be able to do these things and interact the way we are. I mean, imagine if this was the case 10 years ago. We'd be in a totally different scenario, right? So it's a good thing we have the technology, but there is a piece of that is missing. And for people like me, I fuel off of that, right? You and I met at a coffee outside for coffee when we met like the very first time 2.5 years ago or something like that. See, because there's something about it. Just being around, other people. So I think, Carvana is not any different than any other company. We're playing with a mixed bag. I love the term of the COVID hangover. We have pre-COVID, COVID hangover. These are going to be timestamps that we use for years to come.
Like our kids and grandkids are going to be studying this one day in school.
Yeah.
And that's going to be the term. I'm coining it right now.
Yeah.
And we'll get it in Merriam-Webster textbooks or whatever.
Right? One day it's going to be, Nana Kendra, can you tell me about the COVID hangover? Have a seat, kiddo. I love that. I want to know about, you mentioned that I think you said there's 7 corporate values that Carvana has. So I want to hear them because I've read them, obviously, because I read up on the companies that we have on the show. But I want to hear them from you. You don't have to necessarily list all 7, or you could tell us a couple of your favorites. But I want to hear a little bit about these values, because with some companies, they're words on a wall, right? That nobody really pays attention to. But I feel and I hope, right, that Carvana is one of those that you live into these values a little bit more. So I'd love to hear those.
Yeah. So I won't bore the audience with all of them. I think that if you're interested in Carvana, feel free to get in touch with me. I can chat more about these. But I think that of the 7, there's some that stand out as being very interesting and like very core to like what draws me to a company like this, right? And I like there's the more serious ones, and then there's some funny ones. But I think that like your next customer may be your mom is one that we often talk about in who we are.
Wait, say that again. That's one of the values. Your next customer might be your mom.
Yep.
Oh my gosh, I love that.
It says that in giant letters in every building.
My mom's listening, so now she'll know. The next customer could be her. Mom, it's you.
Kendra's mom. We could be your next customer. Let me know if I can help you.
I love it.
But no, so there's no that one. In fact, like we do have it on the walls in every office, right? And like that is there. In fact, in our main headquarters, we have one giant wall. It is, 15 feet tall and like 20 feet wide, covered with these things, right? But like around the corner from that one, there's actually what we call the mom wall, which is literally, it has your next customer, maybe your mom, has a little heart in the middle, and around it is pictures of our moms, like literally people from the office, some of our leaders, some of our, our advocates, some of our engineers. It's literally pictures of them with their mom.
I love this.
And like, it's like this genuine constant reminder of like, we deal with a very wide swath of customers, right? We're not a company that sells a specific thing to law firms or car manufacturers or whatever. We deal with a product that is that crosses all types of boundaries, right? There's no gender specificity. There's no socioeconomic specificity or anything like that. Remember that when you're on the phone, right? And I think that like where we also live that is thinking of it not just when you're talking to one of our customers, but when you're just talking to each other, right? Like your customer is also the person that you deal with internally, right? Like I never talk to customers, excuse me, short of like my in-laws were buying a car from Carvana, so they asked me some questions or things like that, right? That's more of just like I'm talking to a friend or family member, telling them what I can about the process, right? But I don't have like a day-to-day interaction with customers, but my customers are my hiring managers, the engineers that I'm hiring for, and all of that. They're the candidates that I'm working with, when I'm trying to bring people into Carvana. And so the idea and why this sits so well with me is like I've always been a believer in like you treat others the way you expect to be treated, right? It is called the golden rule for a reason. It's cliche as all heck, but it's cliche for a reason because it matters. And I think that's really, really important to always remember and to treat people with respect. And like one of the things that makes me the most proud as a leader is when a candidate or hiring manager tells me that one of my recruiters did something to go out of their way, did something to make the process smoother and more meaningful in the hiring process. That meaning their metrics of like making sure they hire X number of people and whatever, those are important. And yes, I have to track to those, but like it matters more to me that they did it well. I'd rather you hire a couple less people, to be perfectly honest, because our goals are so high anyways that you're going to be hiring a tremendous amount. That like if you hire a couple less people in the year, but because of that, your service level went up exponentially and you took care of people and treated them the way that you want to if you were in that situation, that's a really big difference, right? So there's that one. The other one that I always love sharing, I mentioned Zag Forward, which is really about innovation and stuff like that, but I know we're kind of running a little bit close to time here, so I'll skip ahead. The other one that I love sharing, just because it's funny, is Don't Be Richard. Which is our way of
I like that.
For those that didn't figure it out, just don't be a dick.
I like that.
We have this really fun intro video that our CEO did, where he's wearing like 7 t-shirts on himself, and like every so often he takes the t-shirt off into the next value.
Oh, that's funny.
And he like talks about the values and what they mean. And when he gets to that one, it's the last one that he covers. And he literally goes in there. We said don't be Richard because you can't say don't be a. And I think that like that like just honesty of like we all say things sometimes, we all do things sometimes. And like not all of us are perfect in our language and have cotillion decorum, right, or anything like that. That like let's call it what it is to some extent, and like still respect the fact that this is a business and we want to treat people with respect, right? But like going back to how we actually live those is like I think there's 2 things. Before COVID, it's harder to do right now because there's a lot of events and things that go around that. When we did our quarterly all hands where we get together and like the CEO, the COO, some other folks would post about what's going on with the company. We also did a Halo award for the little halo above our logo. And each of those was tied to a specific value. So we did a value for the people who best embody your next customer may need your mom. Cool. And so people from all around the company, we normally have people from our inspection centers are nominated for this, people from headquarters, from any different area of Carvana are nominated because it's very open for the nominations from our leadership to do. And so they get nominated for this and they do this like big event. Like one of the values is be brave. And for that, anybody who's willing to, we're not brave if they didn't because it's a big deal, got to go skydiving. With members of our executive suites.
What?
So, yeah. So again, we do it up really big. And so we're like, how do we do that? Right. But in quarantine. So like the flip side of what we did is we actually, we originally we were going to give away a car to a deserving employee. And we said 2020 was a bear of a year. So to welcome 2021, because we did this in December, giving away 21 cars. So 21 employees at Carvana that had stories that were like important and that told us something about them, where we felt like this person could really use a win. One of the employees that we had in Detroit was biking, busing, and walking all just to get to work every day, and it was taking an hour and a half. And like he finally got a car, and then it got hit, and it was this whole thing. And so like they nominated him, and he was one of the people that won. And it's like, okay, this is a meaningful thing. This guy is like doing everything possible to work hard and provide for himself and his family, we have the means to be able to give him a little bit of a leg up. Let's give him something, And,
Yeah.
The nice thing too is like I saw some of the cars and we were able to give away some pretty nice cars. It wasn't just like the base model Civic or anything like that, right? Like
Yeah.
I saw some Audis and stuff in there. So
Wow. But what a cool thing for, because that's coming from leadership to approve. That's a lot of money, right? 21 cars. But for leadership to put something together to be able to recognize the need with their employees and a way to give back. I love that. I absolutely love that. And I absolutely love the mom wall. So when you go back in the office, I need to see a picture of the mom wall. I love it.
All right, perfect. I'll see if I still have one on my phone from before.
I love it. Before we start to wrap up, I do have one last question that I always ask my guests that are on the show. And we've kind of hit pieces of this a little bit, but to kind of wrap it all together, if you could take all of these things that we talked about with the company culture at Carvana, if you had to wrap it into one single word, I mean, if you can, what would it be?
Well, we've all seen how verbose I am, so one single word is always hard. But I think that the one that really comes to mind above everything else that I do generally share with candidates about collaboration and education, growth, and everything is authentic or authenticity, right? It is very, very important for us to have everyone come as they are and be themselves. And without sharing too much, because there's some personal stories in here, I will say that like through some of the community Slack channels and stuff, I have seen some people share some very amazing stories of not being able to be themselves in a lot of different ways. Some probably a lot more impactful than others to themselves through their lives, through their professional experience and stuff. And the fact that they can come here and dress like they want and be who they want and talk how they want. And there is no judgment. And that is a very, very important piece of who we are. And something that if I was ever to leave Carvana, it would be like number one with a bullet on my list is finding a place that allows people to be their authentic selves. Because if you're spending all this time pretending to be something that you're not, part of your emotional and mental energy is going to something that is not what we want you to do, right? And that's just such a waste. It really is. It's such a waste, and it's kind of an insult to those people that have to hide part of who they are, and we've all done that to some extent in our lives. But the bigger that piece of yourself is that you're hiding from others, the more you're not able to give that part of yourself to everyone around you and to yourself to focus on the things that matter to you, whether it's your work or your personal life. It takes a lot out of you, and it's very draining. I think that sits more important with me than anything else. As much as I've learned, as much as I can rely on people here, the fact that I can be completely 100% who I am and never fear judgment here, and that so many other people that have probably had much harder past stories than I have are able to do that as well. That means a lot.
And that's huge, especially now. I mean, we're remote. We don't have the opportunity to connect with people as much. And how easy right now, right, to put on whatever image you need to on a quick Zoom call. But to be able to actually keep that authenticity outside of that quick Zoom call and, like you said, allow people to truly be themselves. I mean, that in itself is helping their mental health, right, in all of this. So I love that your word is authentic. So thank you for sharing that. Thank you for just being on here. I'm so excited. I'm always amazed when all of a sudden Karen, our producer, holds up a little note card that says 10 minutes left. I'm like, oh, geez. I'm like, how'd that happen?
Thank you both for having me. This has been a blast. I really appreciate what you all are doing, and I'm looking forward to hearing some more of these from other companies and stuff. Because I think that there's so many good ideas out there, and I love that we have an avenue to share all these things. Because I don't think that I think that sharing these things doesn't take away from, oh, you've shared the secret sauce of what makes a company. It's making everybody's world a little better.
Yeah, and there's not just one way to make the secret sauce, right? Every company that is crushing that good culture, they're doing it different. And the way that they're doing it sometimes doesn't fit other companies. So you have to share those different sauces, right? And learn how it will work with your specific industry and your specific company. And then, we're sharing more resources on the podcast as well. So how are other ways and what are other tools that companies can use to actually help their culture grow even more? So I love having you on. Thank you for the conversation. Real quick before we do close up, will you please let our listeners know how they can reach you?
Yeah, LinkedIn is normally the best. So Neil Shah on LinkedIn. You can search Neil Shah Carvana because my name's common enough that it could get a little bit of a rabbit hole to find me. But connect with me on LinkedIn, and I'm happy to chat and share anything I can.
Awesome. Well, thank you again, Neil, for being on. Thank you for joining us on the Culture Crush podcast, the podcast that does a deep dive with company leaders to learn about real-life experiences, tips for a good culture, and the best practices for creating a healthy work environment where employees can find joy and satisfaction in their work. And such is the case with Carvana. They can actually be their authentic selves. We have some amazing companies to highlight in the upcoming months. Next Monday, we actually have Peak Fleet, tongue twister, and Source Global Water. They'll be talking about values, alignment, and disalignment. But for today, that is it. So we look forward to seeing everyone next time, and we'll hear about more companies that are crushing it with a good company culture.
Thank you for listening to another episode of Culture Crush, the only podcast out there that does a deep dive of companies that are crushing it with a great company culture. If you think your company has a strong culture that should be highlighted, please reach out to Kendra Maples on LinkedIn or email us at culturecrushpodcast@gmail.com.